Rally with one-time bitter foe, now friend, Senator Ted Cruz. The president says the blue wave is dissipating a bit, and he is now enjoying the highest poll numbers of his presidency. We'll talk about those new numbers with senior political analyst Britt Hume. And with the midterms just 2 weeks away, President Trump shifts his focus to immigration, including tough new talk on the migrant caravan heading for the U.S. from Central America. At least 7,000, some say much larger, strong, and growing. President Trump says blame the Democrats and levels some controversial theories about who's part of the caravan. And the New York Times claims transgender could be defined out of existence by the Trump administration. But there is a whole lot more to that story. We investigate what the administration is and isn't planning to do. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We begin tonight with correspondent Kristen Fisher live in Houston, the scene of the latest MAGA rally. Good evening, Kristen.
Yes, Shannon, this was quite a rally tonight. You know, 2 years ago, no one would have believed that President Trump would be campaigning for Senator Ted Cruz, Lion Ted, as he called him. But now President Trump has a new nickname for him, Texas Ted. He debuted it as he was leaving the White House on his way down here to Houston tonight. And when he walked on this stage tonight inside a packed Toyota Center, President Trump gave Senator Cruz a hug. He acknowledged right off the bat that things got nasty between the two of them during the 2016 campaign. But he said since then, Senator Cruz has been critical to enacting the Trump agenda.
Nobody has helped me more with your tax cuts, with your regulation.
He also gave Cruz's opponent, Democrat Beto O'Rourke, a new nickname, Overrated O'Rourke.
Ted's opponent in this race is a stone-cold phony named Robert Francis O'Rourke. But he's actually a radical, open borders left-winger.
Now, the fact that President Trump came here tonight shows you just how uncomfortably close that this race has become for Republicans. Senator Cruz, he's ahead by just 7 points, according to the Real Clear Politics average of polls. And both the president and Senator Cruz think that this caravan of migrants that's currently making their way towards the U.S. border, they think that that could help them win on Election Day.
Do you know how the caravan started? Does everybody know what this means? I think the Democrats had something to do with it, and now they're saying, I think we made a big mistake, because people are seeing how bad it is, how pathetic it is, how bad our laws are.
One of the other big moments from tonight's rally, President Trump taking on his critics who have accused him of being a nationalist.
And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist.
The only line that got more applause than that one was what he said about Senator Elizabeth Warren. You know, he gave two new nicknames tonight, one to Senator Cruz, one to Beto O'Rourke, but he took her nickname away. Shannon, he said that he can no longer call her Pocahontas because she doesn't qualify for that nickname after she released those DNA results. Shannon?
That feud won't be over anytime soon. Kristen, thank you very much. A new Wall Street Journal poll shows President Trump setting a new approval record, though he is still slightly underwater at 47% approval, 49% disapproval. Nevertheless, for the GOP, the timing couldn't be better. The findings point to an energized electorate, the Wall Street Journal points out, buffeted by dynamics that bring great uncertainty to the outcome of an election just 2 weeks away. Let's bring in Fox News senior political analyst Britt Hume to discuss. Good to have you with us, Britt.
Thank you, Shannon. Glad to be here.
Okay, so it's odd for the president and for his backers to be celebrating. He's still underwater, but for him, this is a peak at his approval rating, and it's just heading into the midterms. Is he peaking at the right time?
Well, presidential approval ratings matter in midterms, particularly a president's first midterm. And it does appear from not just this Wall Street Journal poll, but other polling that the president's approval rating has ticked up a bit. It's still, as the Wall Street Journal indicates, underwater, but it's better than it was, and really that does help Republican candidates in this upcoming election for sure.
Well, and the Wall Street Journal says over the last couple of weeks, there's been this closure in key swing districts. When they talk about how this gap has closed up, they say in districts rated as the most competitive by the nonpartisan Cook Political Report, the parties are dead even on the question of which one should control Congress. In last month's poll, Democrats led that same question by 13 percentage points among registered voters and 6 points among likely voters. I mean, mean, for the GOP, that's a gap you want to see close right before people head to the polls.
It is, and there are two things to remember. Races tighten as you get closer to Election Day. That's usually the pattern. But clearly there was a Kavanaugh effect on Republican voters and perhaps to some extent on Democratic voters. But Democratic voters were so motivated already that it's a little hard for me to believe that they got much extra out of that. They were hyped up to vote. But it looks like the GOP, a lot of GOP voters may now feel that way as well. And I'm hearing a lot, that Trump has that hardcore supporters for whom he can do nothing wrong. But there's another category of voters, and I run into them all the time when I'm away from Washington, who say things like, I don't like this guy, but I love what he's doing. I hear that all the time from various different kinds of people in various different situations. And I think that's a factor out there, and it may then, therefore, it may be showing up in his approval rating to some extent, and it may show up in support for congressional candidates running as Republicans.
I had someone say the exact same thing to me last week, and they were very aware of the things that he's doing with rolling back regs. This was a business owner, about federal judges, the bench. I mean, people are paying attention. This is another one. There's been a lot made about suburban women, females, mothers, families, how they would vote. Also in the polling, the Wall Street Journal says this: the poll may explain why the competitive swing districts that will determine control of the House are mostly in suburban districts. And among suburban residents, the parties are virtually tied. 44% favor GOP control and 45% favor a Democratic Congress.
And that doubtless owes something to the fact that, well, the president and his party don't do too well among women, for sure, particularly suburban women. They do quite well among suburban men. That may be sufficient to offset that advantage. So this could turn out to be, even in the House, a much closer affair than we've imagined.
We'll see. We're biting our nails at this point.
Well, we get so close. We got a little while to go here.
And listen, 2 weeks in politics can be an eternity. Who knows how many scandals will erupt between now and then. I want to ask you, too, about the impact on the House, because if the Democrats retake it, a lot of things will change over there. A lot of these are the investigations that have been going on, led by Devin Nunes and other top Republicans, Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, and others. Byron York writes a very interesting piece, and he points out the things that America wouldn't know if not for these investigations. Just a partial list we have here. The role that dossier played in the FBI investigation, who funded the dossier, the anti-Trump bias of some of the top FBI officials involved with this whole thing, Obama officials unmasking Trump officials and intel intercepts, and the role of Fusion GPS.
That's a pretty extensive list.
Yeah.
And those are all things that were uncovered by the House Intelligence Committee, which, under Devin Nunes, which carried on its investigation the fact of stern and unflinching Democratic resistance to everything they did, with Adam Schiff, who's the ranking Democrat on the committee, running out to the cameras and microphones all the time with a very sympathetic media audience, and yet the committee was able to unearth all that stuff, and we wouldn't know it without it. And what's surprising to me is the antipathy toward him, not just among liberals and Democrats, which you would kind of expect, but even among some Republicans. And I think he's been unfairly maligned, and the media coverage of him has been atrocious.
Well, and quickly, it's not just that these investigations would grind to a screeching halt if Democrats were now
go the other way.
Committees. How much do you think the president would actually then be a target?
Well, I think the president would be a constant target. If the Democrats get control of the House, I'm not sure whether they'll try to impeach him. Some members will want to. I'm not sure how far that will go. But there'll be an endless series of investigations and claims and charges and testimony. And unlike the Nunes investigation, these investigations are likely to receive very sympathetic and extensive media coverage.
It'll be interesting to watch the differences if that indeed happens. Brett, thank you very much.
Shannon, thank you.
The migrant caravan almost doubles in size. Some say it's gotten even bigger than that as it pushes forward toward the U.S. border as President Trump threatens to cut foreign aid to Central American countries. Correspondent Trace Gallagher is tracking it all. He's got more from our West Coast Bureau. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. The numbers are kind of hard to nail down because the caravan is more spread out, but now it appears up to 7,000 migrants are moving north. Now, remember, Mexico said it would only allow 100 people per day to apply for asylum, so either Mexican authorities got overrun or they changed policies. President Trump tweeted, quote, "Sadly, it looks like Mexico's police and military are unable to stop the caravan heading to the southern border of the United States. I have alerted the Border Patrol and military that this is a national emergency. Exactly what the U.S. strategy will be once the migrants arrive is unclear." Tonight, the president said this. Watch.
They're going to form a wall, different kind of a wall, until we get the other one built. We need a wall built fast. Fast.
Though keep in mind, a complete shutdown of the border would be an enormously difficult task. The president also threatened to cut funding to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador in 2017. Those countries got 500 million US dollars. And listen to what the president said to an ABC correspondent about the caravan. Watch.
Take your camera, go into the middle, and search. You're going to find MS-13, you're going to find Middle Eastern, you're going to find everything. And guess what? We're not allowing them in our country.
Now, the president offered no evidence to support his claim, and we couldn't find any, but Guatemala's largest newspaper has long documented the fact that Guatemala is a major smuggling corridor for foreigners from Africa. And 11 days ago, Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales said his country had detained and deported up to 100 ISIS terrorists and 1,000 members of MS-13. He did not say when they were apprehended or if there's a connection to the caravan in any way. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also indicated that members of the caravan are inciting violence under the influence of politically motivated leaders. He did not give examples either, but one of the leaders or the leading organizers of last spring's Central American caravan has now been arrested in Mexico for joining this caravan. Shannon.
All right, we still have a lot of questions. Trace, thank you very much for digging in on those answers. All right, in a new op-ed tonight, the Wall Street Journal editorial board agrees and says that President Trump is right to turn back the caravan, partly because it's organized and not necessarily to the benefit of the migrants. Plus, there's this historical note, quote, not since the 1980 Mariel boat lift from Cuba has there been a similar attempt to overwhelm U.S. immigration law on the pretext of celebrating American freedom. Goes on to say Castro saw to it that criminals and mentally ill also climbed aboard those boats. No one doubted the Cuban hunger to escape, but the unintended consequences of the mayhem were costly. Tonight's Power Panel on immigration, Democratic strategist Dave Brown, Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, and Fox News contributor former acting ICE director Thomas Homan. Welcome to all of you.
Hi, Shannon.
All right, I want to start with something that Nancy Pelosi had to say in a joint statement with Chuck Schumer. She said this: the president is desperate to change the subject from health care to immigration because he knows that health care is the #1 issue Americans care about. Lisa, your response?
Well, I would say that Democrats are desperate to not talk about immigration. The Center for American Progress, a liberal think tank, put out a memo to Democrats in competitive races saying to avoid immigration, that sanctuary packs a punch, because Republicans have been on the offense on immigration, on issues like sanctuary cities, on issues like Democrats' calls to abolish ICE. And now what this does is putting immigration in the center, in the focus of the national debate, which is exactly what President Trump wants, is exactly what Republicans want. And Republicans and President Trump should be out there hammering it, because when you see visuals like these migrants breaking down the gates into Mexico, it just demonstrates and underscores President Trump's calls for increased border security. They couldn't ask for a better political gift, to be honest.
Well, okay, so this is something the president has tweeted now. He says every time you see a caravan or people illegally coming or attempting to come into our country illegally, think of and blame the Democrats for not giving us the votes to change our pathetic immigration laws. Remember the midterms, so unfair to those who come in legally. Dave, what do you make of this assertion that this is a huge political gift to the president at just the right time?
Shannon, I agree that it's a political gift to the president because this is a wedge issue that he's been very effective at using, dating all the way back to when he ran for president in 2016. But I disagree, very much disagree with the fact that Democrats haven't been at the table and trying to work in good faith. I mean, look, I served in the Senate in 2013 as an aide. That year we passed comprehensive bipartisan immigration reform. Democrats and Republicans came together. And so there is a proven path. There is a way to find a path forward for bipartisan immigration reform. And if anything, Shannon, I was really struck by the Fox and Friends panel of independent voters. I think it was this morning, to a person, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but to a person, they recognized the humanitarian crisis that's at the border, the plight of these people, but they also said they want Democrats and Republicans to come together. They're tired of the unnecessary partisanship. And so it's unfortunate that the president engages in the kind of rhetoric that he's engaging in at these rallies, where he essentially essentially makes immigration reform a zero-sum game. I don't think that's best for the country.
You know, he put out, I think it was his 4 pillars that he wanted to see get done. He said if you can get these things done, including generous allocations for so-called dreamers who are already here in the country and others connected to them, that he would sign the bill. Republicans and Democrats, they couldn't get it together, so that didn't happen. No one knows better about that than former ICE Director Thomas Homan. We're glad to have you with us tonight. I want to play something that President Trump said at his rally tonight, though, and get your reaction, Thomas.
Look, that is an assault on our country. That's an assault. And in that caravan, you have some very bad people. You have some very bad people. And we can't let that happen to our country.
Thomas, you would know more about this probably than the rest of us put together about exactly who is showing up at the border.
Well, look, you know, we take custody of, ICE took custody of everybody the Border Patrol arrests. If you look at who they've arrested in the last few years, between 18 and 20% have a criminal history. I mean, they've had criminal convictions. This isn't the first time they come to the United States. So there are a lot of criminals coming across the border. Now, I'm not saying every criminal, but as far as, you know, what the president, the comments he made, look, we're a sovereign country. We have the right to protect our borders. And I can't, you know, I've seen the covers also, and, you know, sometimes it's sad to see what you see, but you can't, I can't blame these people that want to come to the United States. We're the greatest country on earth, but you can't be a part of the greatest country on earth and not respect its laws. You can't have it both ways, not under this president, and I agree with 100%. As far as the second speaker talking about your second guest talking about work on the Hill and that Democrats are at the table, well, apparently he wasn't on the Hill last year and a half because I was the ICE director last year and a half, and they weren't at the table. I mean, I met with a lot of lawmakers up there. We tried to shut down the loopholes. They refuse to shut down loopholes. When they talk about sanctuary cities, as your first guest says, and the abolishment of ICE, when you won't fix loopholes, you are enticing. You are enticing others to make that dangerous journey. And it's just not people entering the country illegally. As you said, it's a national security issue because while they're running families through one sector, they're running drugs and bad people through another sector because Border Patrol's tied up. And you know, it's a fact. You know, you can like or not like the president, but he's 100% accurate on this issue.
I want to play something that one of the members of this caravan told us today. This is what he said about the strategy.
This is not going to be easy, but, you know, it's a lot of people. I don't think he's going to be able to stop everybody.
Lisa, what about that?
Well, I think President Trump should try, because what we have here are people that are intentionally trying to exploit our laws, and they're doing that. You look at loopholes in the 2008 anti-human trafficking law that makes it very difficult to send Central American families or Central American individuals back. You also look at things like the Flores decree, which basically means that minors can't be detained for longer than 20 days, which makes it difficult when you have these individuals coming over as family units. So these Central American migrants know what they're doing, and they're intentionally trying to exploit our United States laws. And as I mentioned before, when you see the visual of them breaking through the gates into Mexico, this just underscores President Trump's calls for border security. And this is going to drive people to the polls, particularly considering the fact immigration is the #1 issue for Republicans.
Okay, I want to make sure we get Dave and Thomas in here for a final word. Dave, you, and then on to Thomas.
Look, this is a hard issue. No one who's worked on this issue would say it's an easy issue. But bottom line, and I think I'm probably a broken record on this with you, Shannon, this is an issue that requires good people to come together and compromise and be reasonable. And the problem, you know, one of your speakers talked about how Democrats weren't at the table in the House. That's not true. I disagree with that. But part of the challenge has been that Speaker Ryan and House Republican leadership have allowed members of their caucus to dictate terms.
Okay.
There's actually broad bipartisan consensus in this country for immigration reform, Shannon. Smart people need to come to the table. They need to compromise. We need to find a way forward.
All right, Thomas, final word to you.
Well, the guest is wrong again. I mean, I was the ICE director for a year and a half. I was on the Hill, and I met with a lot of lawmakers. Look, you can't have someone like Nancy Pelosi say ICE agents are out terrorizing innocent immigrant communities. You can't have people like Senator Gillibrand talk about abolishing ICE. You can't have, you know, all those leaders of the Democratic Party saying the things they say. It entices further illegal entry. And I'll add this. This just isn't about law enforcement. This isn't just about enforcing law. When you entice people to make that journey, people will die entering this country. Women will be raped. Children will die crossing the river. And we will bankroll the very criminal organization that murdered Border Patrol agents and ICE agents. We're bankrolling a criminal organization by enticing illegal entry and having open borders. Abolishing ICE equals open borders. Not fixing the loopholes in the law is open borders. Every person on the Hill, whether you're Democrat or Republican, their #1 responsibility is protect this country, and they're not doing it.
All right, Thomas, Lisa, and Dave, thank you all for weighing in.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.
All right, President Trump threatens to build up our nuclear arsenal until Russian leaders come to their senses. So how will Russian President Vladimir Putin respond to messages like that one and this one from the White House?
Right now, they have not adhered to the agreement.
You're saying so too, sir.
It's a threat to whoever you want, and it includes China.
Former CIA station chief Daniel Hoffman's here live on that next. He's going to dive in, plus breaking developments surrounding Saudi writer Jamal Khashoggi's death. An ominous warning from Russia tonight as the Kremlin fights back over President Trump's decision to pull out of the INF treaty. And as one of the president's top advisors is set to meet with Putin tomorrow. Correspondent Rich Edson has more from the State Department. Rich?
Good evening, Shannon. While National Security Advisor John Bolton is in Moscow, President Trump is justifying his administration's plans to terminate a Cold War-era nuclear arms treaty. The president says Russia is cheating, China is not even part of the treaty, and that leaves the United States at a strategic disadvantage.
They have not adhered to the spirit of that agreement or to the agreement itself. Russia. China's not included in the agreement. They should be included in the agreement. Until they get smart, there will be nobody that's going to be even close to us.
The president says the administration will build up the U.S. arsenal until people come to their senses. And when that happens, he says the U.S. will halt its buildup and reduce its weapons. The U.S. and Soviet Union signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987, mandating the destruction and prohibition of ground-launched ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges between about 300 and 3,500 miles. The Obama administration claimed Russia was violating the treaty, though chose to hold it together out of concerns it would prompt an arms race. The Russian government denies it's in violation of the treaty. The Kremlin says the U.S. decision will make the world a more dangerous place, as Russia will have to take measures to ensure its own security. The Chinese government says the U.S. should think twice about withdrawing. Russian state media reports Ambassador Bolton has met with several top Russian officials, and tomorrow perhaps will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Shannon?
Rich Hudson at the State Department, thank you. And there are reports tonight that CIA Director Gina Haspel is traveling to Turkey amid an international outcry after Saudi Arabia's explanation about the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And the Turkish president says his investigation into Khashoggi's death will reveal the naked truth, possibly a different truth. Also tonight, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin meets with the Saudi Crown Prince as he continues to deny any involvement in the killing. But President Trump says he is not satisfied by what he's heard from the Saudis so far.
I'm going to know very shortly because I have a great group of people in Turkey right now and a great group of people in Saudi Arabia, and I will know very soon. And I am not satisfied with what I've heard.
Joining me now, Fox News contributor, former CIA station chief Daniel Hoffman. Always good to have you with us.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's start with Turkey because we know the CIA director is en route, if not already there. Erdogan has said he's giving this speech tomorrow, and he is going to publicly lay out what they have found in their investigation so far. So how important that she is there as well?
Yeah, I think it was a great move for her to travel to Turkey because the essence of what President Erdogan is going to say tomorrow is based on the intelligence that his service, his intelligence service, has collected. The technical surveillance of the consulate, human surveillance, is really the basis, the evidence on which the whole case relies. And I think Director Haspel will be there tomorrow herself firsthand to examine the evidence and to engage with senior Turkish officials.
Okay, the Washington Post says this tonight. It says the chief concern for Washington is that Erdogan will reveal details about Khashoggi's killing that implicate Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has been a key ally for the Trump administration. I mean, listen, they're in a tough spot, but the president has said repeatedly, we're sending our top people over there. We know that Secretary Mnuchin's over there. Now the CIA director, he says, we want to know the truth.
Right, and that is the key question we've been asking since this began. Who gave the order to send these 15 Saudis on the Gulf Stream to essentially to murder Khashoggi? And were those orders carried out as they were intended? And was the guy who gave the orders Mohammed bin Salman? And if it was, that is going to have serious implications for our bilateral relationship. Just tomorrow begins the Saudi Investors Conference, and nobody's showing up except the Russians and the Pakistanis. That really doesn't augur well for Prince Salman's signature policy, the 2030 vision designed to diversify the Saudi economy. That's really where the Saudis are also going to have to make some important decisions about their future.
Bret Baier this weekend talked with the Saudi foreign minister, and here was his explanation about this mission.
This was an operation where individuals ended up exceeding the authorities and responsibilities they had. They made a mistake when they killed Jamal Khashoggi in the consulate, and they tried to cover up for it.
And he did go on to refer to it as a criminal act. He said people will be held responsible. Will there be definitive enough findings to tell us whether or not the Crown Prince was directly involved in giving orders?
Again, I think that's the penultimate question. I'd be hesitant to offer a guess about whether I think the evidence is going to prove that or not. But what I would say is that our intelligence community already knows a whole lot. And right now the Turks are out front saying what they've got with the evidence. We'll hear more tomorrow. But I think there's going to be a lot more work to do. And one of the reasons why Secretary Pompeo flew to Riyadh and pressed the Saudis, I think partly was because we kind of know a lot about what happened, and we're trying to get them to do the right thing with some transparency. We know that at the beginning, they had said that Khashoggi simply walked out of the consulate, which wasn't true. And then this odd description of a brawl which erupted with one guy against 15. Yeah. So there's still a lot of truth to get to here.
I want to quickly ask you before we go about Russia, about the president's decision to pull out of the INF treaty. He says, we're going to build up our nukes until they come to their senses. We're just going to keep doing it so nobody can challenge us.
Yeah, this is a good bit of Kremlin theater. Going back to 2007, Vladimir Putin said that the INF treaty wasn't very good for Russia. He needs intermediate-range nuclear forces to deal with Europe and to deal with China as well. He's got the SS-25. He's absolutely violated this treaty, but he's trying to portray it as if the United States is the one not adhering to the treaty. Russia likes to say that we're committed, that Russia is committed to a multipolar world, and it's the United States that we need to deal with. Nothing could be farther from the truth. I'd really like to see Ambassador Bolton go out and give one of his press conferences from Moscow, where he holds the Russians accountable.
Yeah. It'll be very interesting to see if that meeting takes place, what we get afterwards. Daniel Hoffman, thank you as always.
Thank you.
All right, what is really going on inside the migrant caravan? Up next, we're going to take you there, inside. Fox News correspondent William Lajeunesse is in southern Mexico. He needs talking to the migrants, the people involved here, so stick around to see what he has uncovered.
If you're waiting.
President Trump says the growing caravan from Central America is giving cover to some bad actors. National correspondent William Lajeunesse is in southern Mexico with the latest.
A showdown heading towards the U.S. border as the migrant caravan began moving some 25 miles north Monday, helped by Mexicans offering food, water, and transportation.
You know, like these people's doing right now. Look at them. They got good hearts.
Since leaving Honduras last week, organizers say the group doubled in size to more than 7,000. Some applied for asylum here, but most say they want to enter the U.S., legally or not, despite the president's warning.
This is not going to be easy. But, you know, it's a lot of people. I don't think he's going to be able to stop everybody.
After first telling President Trump it would stop the caravan, Mexico reversed course, overwhelmed by sheer numbers and wanting to avoid a violent confrontation. The immigrants also know the U.S. cannot catch or deport them all, releasing hundreds of Central Americans each day because of court decisions and a lack of shelter space.
I don't know if we're gonna apply for asylum. You know, that depends if we can get there first. You know, but my dream is get through the border.
That remains some 1,400 miles away, or roughly a 3-month walk. Migrants hope buses or the train will cut that time in half. Their final destination, we're told, California, not Arizona or Texas. Mexico says roughly 1,000 families applied for asylum here. If approved, they can stay in Mexico to live and work. The United Nations Refugee Agency is helping process those claims, but also makes the distinction between migrants fleeing crime and poverty versus likely victims of racial, religious, or political persecution.
Migrants are the ones that willingly are leaving their countries to pursue a better future, as you mentioned. while refugees are people that they don't have the possibility to go back, either because they will face death or retaliation.
What we are seeing is a massive exodus from Honduras, from Guatemala, even El Salvador. What the people say is because of the crime and the corruption and the poverty, they have no hope of staying, no work, and it's better off leaving than staying. And that is one reason we continue to see people to come. We even have reports late tonight that people are back at the river coming north. Shannon.
William Lajeunesse, thank you. The war of words over covering the caravan. That leads to tonight's Real News Roundup. The Associated Press changing the headline of a story about the group. It originally read in part, a ragged growing army of migrants. But after some Twitter users accused the AP of promoting a, quote, racist agenda, the news agency changed the headline to read, ragged growing caravan of migrants resumes march toward U.S. Well, Axios founder Jim Vandehei says journalists should stop sharing their opinions on Twitter because it often reveals their left-wing bias. In a Sunday piece on Axios, Vandehei cautioned the media to be careful on social media. Quote, snark, jokes, and blatant opinion are showing your hand, and it always seems to be the left one. This makes it impossible to win back the skeptics. Well, dramatic scene this afternoon at the Washington, D.C. Fox affiliate WTTG. An unnamed man forced his way through the station's glass doors before ultimately being shot by an armed guard. Officials say that man had previously sent threatening emails to the station's staff and law enforcement. He's currently in critical condition at a local hospital. Well, the New York Times says the Trump administration is mulling over a new definition for the word gender. What's really going on there? We're going to talk about it with the Family Research Council's Tony Perkins and radio talk show host Ethan Behrman. Stay tuned.
This is important for people.
LGBT activists mobilizing today, leading protests outside the White House after New York Times report that said this: transgender could be defined out of existence under Trump administration. All right, so we asked correspondent Garrett Tenney to dig in, try to find us the truth about this. Good evening, Garrett.
Shannon, good evening to you. According to the New York Times, the Department of Health and Human Services is considering a much narrower definition of gender, one that's determined by the genitals a person is born with. A draft memo obtained by the Times purportedly describes the proposed criteria this way. Quote, sex means a person's status as male or female based on immutable biological traits identifiable by or before birth. The sex listed on a person's birth certificate as originally issued shall constitute definitive proof of a person's sex unless rebutted by reliable genetic evidence. HHS is not commenting on what it calls an alleged leaked proposal, but it did point out that in 2016, a federal judge ruled the Obama administration went too far in using its broad definition of sex to conclude that discrimination based on gender identity was a civil rights violation. That was one of many moves the Obama administration made to expand the legal concept of gender, and one of many the Trump administration is now working to roll back. If the proposed rule goes forward, it would mark a major shift for transgender rights based on how gender is defined. Today, there were protests at the White House, and activists said the administration is trying to wipe away transgenders from society altogether.
The notion that HHS can just wish into being a fantasy world in which transgender people don't exist and decades of law no longer apply to the federal government is not how this works.
This afternoon, though, the president said he wants to protect everyone, and this latest proposal is just one of many being looked at.
We're looking at it. We have a lot of different concepts right now. They have a lot of different things happening with respect to transgender right now. You know that as well as I do, and we're looking at it very seriously.
Dr. Mark Siegel, meanwhile, says HHS is simply trying to do its job and follow the law.
Their role and job in the world is to keep policies going that are out there to help our public health. They don't have a policy, a stated policy on sex or gender. In that case, they're just trying to uphold the law that already exists.
And a decision on this proposal, if it does go forward, isn't expected to come until late this year at the soonest, more likely sometime next year. Shannon?
All right, Garrett, thank you very much for tracking down that information. Okay, so what exactly is the Trump administration considering? What does this all mean? Let's bring in KGO AM radio host Ethan Behrman and Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, I want to play a little bit more from Rhea Carey from the National LGBTQ Task Force, part of what she had to say today.
Dehumanizing those you do not like is the hallmark of an authoritarian government.
The group added to that this statement: the courts, science, medicine, and civil and human rights leaders are united in the definition of gender, sex, gender identity, gender expression, and gender discrimination, no matter what Trump and his administration says or does. So, Tony, she says the court, science, medicine, human rights activists, they're all on the same page.
Well, look, what the Trump administration is doing is simply addressing the lawlessness of the Obama administration and restoring the law. Look, Congress in 1964 and in 1972 addressed the issue of sex discrimination. You cannot tell me that in the minds of Congress that they were thinking of gender identity and all of the stuff we're seeing today. If this is a problem, then Congress should address it and change the law. What the Obama administration did was simply unilaterally change the definition to include this fluid gender identity term. And the Trump administration is just restoring the law. That's all they're doing.
Okay, Ethan, HHS, again, as Garrett reported, they also said to us that they don't comment on something that is viewed as a leaked document. They're not commenting on whether anything about that. But they did say this: the Obama administration's broad definition of sex was enjoined by a federal court on a nationwide basis in December 2016, and the Obama administration did not appeal. The court order remains in full force and effect today, and HHS is bound by it as we continue to review the issue. They went on to say everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Ethan, what do you make of that explanation?
Well, I think everybody does deserve to be treated with respect. It's interesting, though, I disagree with Tony and the HHS on this one. The circuits are split on gender orientation and whether or not that is covered under the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We can go back 4,000 years, and the Egyptians had 3 genders identified. This is not something new. It's not out of the blue. Many civilizations around the world have identified more than the binary nature of genders as defined maybe in our Bible that Tony and I read, but it's broader than that, and our laws are here to protect those who are minorities and can be discriminated against.
Ethan,
and we have evolved that way over the years.
To that point, though, and as Tony mentioned, I mean, this isn't something Congress did. Do you think there's any appetite in Congress now to talk about this redefinition of the word gender or sex as we understand it for federal laws?
Well, I think right before the midterms, absolutely not. And we'll see what happens on November 6th, and it might become a bigger issue if the Democrats win in a blue wave. However, again, I think the most important thing here is as our country has progressed, we have recognized the wrongs of demeaning and minimizing minorities that have been abused. I mean, it starts with slaves who were freed. We have the Reconstruction Amendments. We have the 19th Amendment to allow women to vote. We have the Civil Rights Act.
But we
don't want to
laws.
remove rights. Let's grant them.
But we changed the laws. Lawlessness is a danger to our security, whether it's on our southern border or in our elementary school bathrooms. And in terms of civil rights and protections, every man, woman, and child has constitutional rights and are protected under our laws. But what we're doing by this policy that was put in place without an act of Congress, this was the Obama administration, we're putting people at risk. We're actually denying people equal protection under the law, because under this we would force women that are going to battered shelters for abused women, we would force them under government policy to be housed with men, biological men. This makes no sense. The courts, as you said, there's a split in the courts, but Congress has never dealt with this. Let Congress deal with it.
I think Ethan's right. It's not going to happen before the midterms, but we'll see what does happen. Tony and Ethan, thank you very much for good discussion on this.
All right, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
Massive manhunt in Georgia for a suspected cop killer. It ends tonight.
Jordians asked, and
Authorities in Westchester County, New York, confirming an explosive device was found tonight near the home of progressive billionaire activist George Soros. We're told a bomb squad was called and safely detonated the device. Soros was not home at the time. Well, an Atlanta area police officer gunned down this weekend, triggering a massive manhunt, and now the suspect is dead as well. Correspondent Jonathan Seri has the story. Jonathan.
Good evening, Shannon. Police say it was a tip that led them to the suspected cop killer. More than 75 officers descended on a residential area just outside of Snellville, a suburb about 25 miles northwest of Atlanta. Police went to one house and got permission to search a wooden shed behind the home. They noticed someone inside and determined it was indeed the man they were looking for. 18-year-old Teferi Maynard, accused of fatally shooting a Gwinnett County police officer.
Mr. Maynard was issued verbal commands. He failed to comply with those verbal commands. One of the officers had a taser. A taser was deployed. Prior to the taser being deployed, Mr. Maynard had his hand behind his back, would not show his hand. At what point he did show his hand, which contained an edged weapon. The second officer on the scene did fire his firearm, striking Mr. Maynard. Mr. Maynard died on the scene.
Officer Antoine Toney was shot Saturday while responding to a call about a suspicious vehicle parked near a middle school outside Snellville. After the shooting, another suspect drove off in the vehicle but crashed a short distance away. Police say Isaiah Pretlow pointed a gun at one of the officers pursuing him, but was eventually brought into custody by U.S. Marshals. Pretlow faces charges of aggravated assault. The slain officer, Officer Toney, was 30 years old and originally from Southern California. He had been with the Gwinnett County PD for just shy of 3 years. It was his first police job. Gwinnett Police Chief Butch Ayers describes Toney as a very jovial person who was dedicated to his job and dedicated to his community. Shannon?
Jonathan, he is truly a hero. Thank you. And now, from one hero to another, our Midnight Heroes tonight come from the Fairfax County, Virginia Fire and Rescue Unit 427. They got a call that a dog had somehow gotten stuck in a heating and air conditioning vent, so they showed up, took on the job. The fire unit cut a hole in the roof of a closet and were able to free the